Okay, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the point 7 of our inter-agenda. And this point 7 is the hearing about the trade relation between the European Union and Taiwan. The public hearing is mainly physically here, but of course we have some guests remotely. Taiwan is member of WTO since 2002, and of course it's an important economic partner of the European Union, specifically of course in the field of semiconductor, that's for sure. In total, Taiwan was our 12th partner for trade in goods, and the EU is the biggest investor in Taiwan. European Parliament is really keen to look to these trade relations. Last year there was a delegation of the Inter in Taiwan, and we will discuss the trade and investment relation today. Therefore, we have, of course, some experts and some guests. And we will start with some keynote speakers, two of them. It's Ms. Cynthia Wu. She is a member of the Taiwanese legislative body, the Yuan, and welcome to the European Parliament. And we have with us Ms. Joanna Czerniowska, the Director for Asia in the DG Trade. Welcome again, Joanna. So the two will make a keynote to set the scene of the trade and investment relation. And afterwards we have some further experts, four of them, to discuss in deep the issue. And I want also welcome Mr. Shen. He is the representative of Taiwan to the EU here in Brussels. So our time is of course limited, and therefore I want really to invite everybody to stick to the speaking time. And for the two keynotes, I would give each of the two 8 minutes. And Ms. Wu, you should start.
Good morning, Chairman Lang and the members of the European Parliament. It is an honor to be here today to represent Taiwan's Legislative Yuan, which consists of 113 elected legislators, including myself. First, on behalf of our government, I would like to thank you for initiating this momentum to build what may become a future bilateral investment agreement between Taiwan and the EU. My objective today is to let the audience understand 3 issues. First, what is Taiwan? Second, where are we going? And third, why is it in the EU's strategic interest to begin trade and investment formal relations with Taiwan? Next slide. Taiwan has a GDP of 723 billion euros and has a population of 23 million people. If Taiwan were a member of the EU, we would be the 6th largest economy and have the 5th largest population in the Union. Currently, over 50% of global cargo shipping passes through the Taiwan Straits, and we manufacture, as you all know, 60% of the world's semiconductors. As you can see, we are a key player in the global value chain, and we have a strategic location in the Indo-Pacific region. To give you a sense of the diversity of our 23 million people, there are 15 Formosan languages spoken by 1.5% of our population, while Hokkien, Hakka, and Mandarin are the predominant Chinese dialects spoken. And for our local elections, Taiwan is divided into 6 major cities and 16 counties. Just for your amusement, below is a local artist who recently asked ChatGPT to personify the characteristics of each of our cities, and I've included 3 illustrations below. The center one is Hsinchu, the city that you all know would be the home of Taiwan Semiconductor Group. Next slide. Taiwan has a long-term economic performance which is strong and consistent. As you could see from the cumulative MSCI index performance, the bottom yellow line is MSCI emerging markets. The middle line is MSCI Investable Market Index, which captures both the 24 developed markets and the 23 emerging markets, which consists of 99% of the global equity investable market set. And the top dark blue line is the Taiwan MSCI, which is clearly outperforming. Next slide. Taiwan's economic performance over the past 5 years has continued to grow despite many of the global upheavals. The left-hand side is just to show you our economic resilience, and the right side is simply to point out that in these challenging times, faced with increased cost of living and the fight for natural resources, not all democratic nations, like Taiwan, chose to stand with Ukraine. Next slide. Taiwan's current FDI situation is that our inbound FDI from the EU in 2002 is actually 6 times larger than our outbound FDI to the EU. What is worthy to note is that Taiwan has signed economic agreements with US and Singapore, the 2 countries who constitute 45% of our total outbound foreign direct investments. So perhaps a sectorial approach to collaboration in areas such as supply chain resilience, cybersecurity, and healthcare could be building blocks to what would pave way for an eventual bilateral investment agreement. Next slide. So what is new today is I'd like to share with you 5 new developments in Taiwan's legislative yuan that can help deepen relations with the EU. Next slide. Number 1, the amendment of the Central Bank Act to create a sovereign wealth fund. Many of you may not know that Taiwan's foreign reserves is actually the 4th largest in the world after US, China, and Russia. It currently accounts for $623 billion US dollars. The proposal in Parliament currently stands that 10% of this money would be set aside for a sovereign wealth fund, fully invested in overseas for pure financial gain and seeking long-term risk-adjusted returns. This main goal would be to increase savings and purchasing power parity of our government to help alleviate the financial burdens of an aging society, which would include things such as pensions and healthcare costs. Next slide. The second topic would be around Taiwan becoming the 3rd country in Asia to adopt GDPR. Taiwan can connect with democratic allies using interoperable standards by adopting GDPR domestically. Modifying our laws will not only protect the rights of our citizens, but also reduce the cost for companies seeking access in both our markets through the harmonization of legal standards. Number 3, developing digital health to support an aging society. Taiwan did relatively well during COVID, but we need to capture all of that digital health applications through formal legislation. While we will be entering a super age economy in 2025, and with a shortage of labor and a vast landmass of 14,000 square miles, telehealth will be essential to mitigating the unequal distribution of medical resources. Next slide. Number 4, sustainability transformation for businesses and future generations. While our government is in principle supportive of net zero by 2050, the reality is more challenging. We're helping address the pressures due to CBAM that would affect our manufacturing industry. This constitutes 3.7 billion euros of exports in the EU listed on the table on the right. Also, renewable energy is now a quarter of our energy source. However, as a net importer of energy, the only way to be sustainable would be to reactivate nuclear power, which is a highly contested topic. And this is an area that the EU has many examples to share with Taiwan. Number 5, apart from the alignment of EU standards of GDPR and CBAM, is the other topic around the alignment of global minimum tax. As the Netherlands is currently the technology headquarters of Europe, so too can Taiwan achieve a similar status in Asia by adopting international tax standards. This is an example to merely show that there's still a lot of potential for Taiwan's growth. Next slide. Taiwan has signed 32 bilateral investment agreements and free trade agreements. This is due to Taiwan's economic and strategic importance and our reputation of being a trusted and reliable international partner. The most recent one was Vietnam in 2019. Next slide. While tariffs are neither fashionable nor part of current negotiations for many countries, Taiwan, as a member of the WTO, is always open to discuss formal treaties with like-minded partners. Also note that the two illustrations here, US and Canada, are working to formalize economic agreements with Taiwan consistent to their One China policy. Decoupling from China is unrealistic, but de-risking is pragmatic. And finally, next slide. Thus, the EU can achieve greater strategic autonomy by formalizing its cooperation with Taiwan through a bilateral investment agreement or any of the other ideas I've put forth in my presentation today. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ms. Wu. Thanks a lot for this comprehensive overview and also for respecting the 8 minutes. Thanks a lot. Joanna.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation to the event. Thank you for Mrs. Wu's presentation, very interesting, and be happy to engage in discussion later on. Well, I think we all agree that EU and Taiwan are important trade and investment partners, and I would even say they are indispensable partners.
Excuse me, it's difficult for interpreters to hear her. Then if she can put the micro nearer her mouth.
Okay. I hope it doesn't cut from my 8 minutes, and I will not repeat the introduction. So directly to the numbers, because I think it's important to also give few numbers that illustrate how important this relation is. You said it yourself, Chair, that Taiwan is EU's 12th trading partner, and we are Taiwan's 4th trade partner. And trade in goods has been consistently increasing over the past 2 years by 25%, by 30% last year. Taiwan also imports almost 1/3 of semiconductor equipment from Europe. And EU has remained the most important foreign direct investor in Taiwan with a share of more than 36%. But of course, this relation has potential to grow, and we are very well aware, particularly looking at relatively low level of investments, Taiwanese investments in Europe. And we think that with the Taiwan strategy to diversify their investment destinations, Europe is certainly one of those that should be very well considered. So we certainly have interests, and we certainly are very much interested in developing the relations, trade and investment relations with Taiwan. And let me give you a brief overview of where we stand today in terms of various areas and platforms for cooperation. I would like to maybe start by saying that we have to be very creative and open-minded about what mechanisms are the best in order to foster this cooperation. So with this in mind, we have, as you are aware, modernized our trade and investment dialogue last year. We had a second edition end of April this year, and we pursue 3 strands of cooperation with Taiwan. We thought it's of utmost importance to add more strategic element to this dialogue. We focus on traditional trade and investment irritants, and we also added a forward-looking strand of cooperation, which I will describe in a moment. So first of all, I would say that when setting up the TID, when we decided to expand our discussion to cover security aspects of trade and investments, that was a very timely move, and that has been confirmed not least by the adoption of our economic security strategy last month, which, among others, while discussing what are the responses to breakthrough dependencies and how to de-risk our economy, talks about doing it with partners, and Taiwan is one of such partners. So TID offers a platform to deepen the discussion about our related security interests. We had very good discussions on outbound investment screening. We had very good discussions on export controls. We tapped to the experience of Taiwan, particularly on outbound investments, and we think that understanding and following each other good practices is a very way good forward when we talk about trade and security. Then, as in every trade and investment relations, we have trade irritants, and we have to talk about those as well. So we discussed our long-standing problems with SPS and regionalization, and I wanted to tell you that, of course, we would like to see much more progress than what we have seen until now, but we are open-minded, and we can also consider targeted measures and targeted solutions, should Taiwan also agree with this, to break through this, as I said, long overdue trade problem. The same for offshore wind. Taiwan has very ambitious targets in order to reach certain level of renewable energy in their energy mix. Taiwan is not yet there, and EU companies can offer very good expertise and know-how and knowledge in order to arrive at the levels that were envisaged. And therefore, we would be very keen to see that offshore wind cooperation with Taiwan starts on a better foot with a new round of offshore wind auctions. Now, I also mentioned that we looked into concrete steps forward in our economic relation, and we thought about areas that are particularly important for economy of 21st century. And that's why we have come up with the proposals to strengthen or to actually initiate cooperation on digital facilitation. This is even more important because this idea was suggested by our businesses. They see it as something that represents concrete means to boost our trade and investment flows. And we also expect that launching this new work stream can give renewed impetus to our existing dialogues and demonstrates shared willingness to take trade relations forward in new and innovative ways. And just to mention and explain, we will be talking initially about invoicing, about e-signatures, anything that has potential to facilitate business making on both sides. I will also add that in March, we have met in the context of our investment working group. And this is a platform that has been mandated to come up with creative and pragmatic ideas to strengthen investment relationship. And this together with input from businesses. And that takes me to the last point of my overview, which is importance of working with business community. I think we're going to hear in a moment how companies see cooperation between the EU and Taiwan. And I would like to give two examples of extremely useful and beneficial initiatives that one of them took place in May, June. And I'm referring to European Innovation Week, which gathered more than 1,600 participants, business communities on both sides, with number of direct business-to-business contacts in all areas that are critical for developing trade and investment relations with Taiwan, stretching from AI, semiconductors, biotech, machinery, robotics, you name it. And secondly, in October, we plan to organize yet one more edition of the European Investment Forum. And this, again, because of the inputs and requests from the industry, will be focused on the ICT technologies and on semiconductors. So we are of the view that this type of concrete initiatives has real potential to strengthen trade and investment ties between economies, because as we all know, ultimately it is about companies and business relations that create those trade and investment ties. Now, I would like to add one more point, which is what is our source of inspiration and how we draw conclusions as to how to best design the way forward. We listen not only to the EU companies, we listen to the Taiwanese companies, because as I said, we have interest in bringing Taiwanese companies in the EU. And what we have consistently heard, it's not the need for having an overall investment framework, but the need to tackle very specific operational problems. And to give you examples, companies talk about lack of knowledge of the investment environment in the EU. They talk about problems with shortage of skills. They talk about problems with double taxation. All these are the matters that we can discuss in a very targeted and specific manner, and we are very willing to have these discussions with our Taiwanese colleagues. So just to finish, I believe that all this makes very clear that we have many regular, fruitful interactions with Taiwan on trade and investment matters. We continue to launch new and useful initiatives, and we are actively considering what other avenues and mechanisms of cooperation might exist which would serve supporting investors on both sides. And on my side, I will be very keen to hear what the business community has to add to this reflection. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Jonna. And thanks a lot once again to both of you for this keynote, for introducing and giving the picture Before going now to the four experts discussing the question of trade and investment a little bit more in depth, I would really welcome our former colleague, Arne Lietz, sitting in the back. Welcome, Arne, as a visitor for this hearing here. We have four experts now for the discussion. It's Henry Shang. He is Vice Chairman of the European Chamber of Commerce in Taiwan, and he will join us remotely from Taiwan. It's Ms. Elena Suarez, the Senior Advisor of Business Europe, and she's here in person. Ms. Christy is the Director of the Taiwan ASEAN Studies Center at Tsinghua Institution of Economic Research, and she is also joining us remotely. And finally, Ms. Lynn Goetholz is Director of European Institute for Asian Studies, and she is also here with us. All the speakers have now 7 minutes to go into the depth of the trade and investment relation, and Mr. Chang is now the first. And welcome, Mr. Chang, and hello to Taiwan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pleased to be here on behalf of the ECCT. For those who may be unfamiliar, we are the principal organization representing European businesses here in Taiwan on the ground. In recent years, we've exceeded 1,000 members, representing 400 plus organizations. And as you've no doubt heard before, Europe represents the largest group of investors in Taiwan, with cumulative investment amounts that exceed the second and the third largest countries combined, and that's the United States and Japan. Next slide, please. A brief word on our own organization, which is an interesting anecdote. We happen to be the second oldest European chamber in the world. Next slide, please. So we hope to, from our business perspective, address the four issues. How are the EU companies doing in Taiwan, the problems they're facing, and those include certainly local content requirements, and not only in the offshore wind industry. We have the lack of charging stations, incentives in the automotive industry. We have homologation and double testing standards. Many of these are niche area issues and are addressed in an appendix, which we have compiled and are happy to share with those interested. We will look at improvements or recommendations, and finally, we will give our word on cooperation mechanisms. Next slide, please. Here you see the three themes or domains that our priorities have taken us this past year: in Taiwan energy transformation, in talent education, and in technology future trends, which cover at least 5 of the industries: smart city infrastructure, e-mobility, semiconductors, and those supporting industries surrounding the manufacture of semiconductors, health tech, and low carbon initiative. Next slide, please. And we can skip this slide. This is just a representation that our board is representative of all the industries that are active here in Taiwan. Next slide, please. Each year, we'll put together a position paper. In 2023, our title, our theme is Recognizing Taiwan's Success, Seizing Opportunities in the Changing World Order, where we put forth 161 issues and are well received, as in the past, by the government. Next slide, please. And in terms of our industry focus, you can see healthcare, electric vehicle, offshore wind, supplemented by hydrogen, and looking ahead, what we call Family-Friendly Alliance, which focuses on Taiwan's low birth rate being an issue, and of course its impact on talent and foreign talent, or European talent in particular, to perhaps fill that space. And finally, the ESG finance, which we all know is the engine that drives all of the industries above. Next slide, please. A successful business in Taiwan often complements those of the government policies, whether it's the EU or in Taiwan. So our frequent engagement with the government, including President, Ministry of Economic Affairs, National Development Council, and also Speaker of the Legislative Yuan, are helpful in that respect. It allows us to give our input as well as listen to potential trends that are developing. So very happy to see earlier Legislator Cynthia Wu giving her comments, and we look forward to working more closely with her in the future. Next slide, please. Businesses often come across barriers which are on the local government level. And separately, we all know there's an election coming up in Taiwan next year, and here are all three presidential candidates represented. Vice President Lai, former mayor of Tainan, new Taipei City mayor, as well as former Taipei City mayor. Next slide, please. We can skip this slide only to show that our country managers of European businesses here give lectures and provide internships to students, which of course raise the profiles of the businesses, but also give us direct access to the young talent that's developing here in Taiwan. Next slide, please. So finally, our annual Open Door mission. There was also a Taiwan-Europe Interparliamentary Association visit, as well as past intercommittee visits itself. Next slide, please. So in summary, in terms of how EU businesses are doing, I think the major investment projects are continuing. While some are being more cautious, others have made clear commitments. Germany's Merck, for example, Dutch ASML, and all of the offshore wind development players have made very clear and substantial commitments to projects in Taiwan. When we look at the problems, of course, as I mentioned before, local content, lack of charging stations, incentives in the automotive industry, homologation and double testings, and many more. And those are contained in some index that we've compiled together and are happy to share with everyone. And our experience has been that we try to what we call approach the low-hanging fruits, meaning those situations where win-win approach could be solved, and that's by way of finding positions where we can stand firm on business and local issues, however, be flexible on business term issues. And finally, trusted partnerships are always most important. Often we hear about shared values in the geopolitical context, but here we're talking about business ethics, compliance, and security issues. And finally, a word on the EU-Taiwan cooperation mechanisms. We believe it is a matter of timing and statement, with the U.S. making the 21st century trade agreement. Certainly, the trade and investment dialogue is also a positive step in the right direction. However, we support a more visible and high-profile statement, and that includes the more targeted agreements. So in conclusion, we believe that both the timing and the opportunity is ripe for a more committed government-to-government structured approach, which would certainly send the signal to both government and Taiwanese investors that Europe welcomes Taiwanese investment and that Europe is a safe and right place to invest. Next slide, please. And with that, I conclude. Thank you very much.
Great last slide. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for this overview about the activities in Taiwan. And now I give the floor to Elena from the Business Europe perspective, please.
Yeah, hello and good morning to everyone. Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for having me here today. I will give a little bit the perspective from the European-based businesses. I'm representing Business Europe today. Let me start by saying or reminding a little bit the audience that European companies are currently struggling to preserve their global competitiveness. As you know, after major supply chain disruptions during the COVID pandemic, then came Russian invasion of Ukraine. As a result, European businesses are facing the consequences of an asymmetric shock as the rise in energy costs is much higher in Europe than in other regions. This combined with incentives and subsidies by some of Europe's key trading partners are driving investments outside from Europe. And we read it in the news. Many companies have relocated outside Europe or have plans to do so. In this challenging context, companies are striving to build more resilient and diversified supply chains in order to be less vulnerable to future shocks. De-risking is now very much in the minds of European companies. And Taiwan is a crucial link in the supply chains for many European companies. Although Taiwan is only Europe's 13th largest trading partner, it is a crucial provider, as we know, of some important technologies, of course, particularly semiconductors, as Taiwan produces 90% of most advanced chips, as we know. However, the EU runs a persistent trade deficit with Taiwan, and it has been mentioned by Mr. Chang, European companies face technical barriers when exporting or trying to invest in Taiwan. Moreover, the EU is the largest foreign investor in Taiwan. I think this has been mentioned already. But Taiwan's investment in the EU is relatively low. Taiwanese investment in recent years only represents around 3% of Taiwan's global FDI stocks. Therefore, certainly there is scope for deepening our economic relations, no doubt, and addressing also the barriers that companies face on both sides. However, when considering how to deepen cooperation with Taiwan, we believe it is important to keep in mind the following two factors. First, the economic situation in Europe is challenging at the moment and is likely to remain like this in the foreseeable future, mainly due to the situation in Ukraine. Secondly, tensions in the Strait of Taiwan are very high at the moment, as we know, and we should try to keep the status quo as much as possible. It is not in the interest of neither companies in the EU nor Taiwan to take measures that would increase tensions. Therefore, although certainly European businesses, we are very much in favor of deepening our economic relations with Taiwan, we should be smart on how to do it and also creative on how to do it. We need to ask ourselves if what we want to achieve is really to deepen our economic ties with Taiwan or to make a political statement. If we want to achieve the former, deepening economic ties with Taiwan, we believe that the best way is to intensify our cooperation on several areas, as it was mentioned by Director Szynkowska, intensify our technical cooperation, etc. For example, the EU has already a bilateral trade and investment dialogue, which my understanding is that now has been raised to Director General level. This is a very good basis on which we can build on, and the current situation should help us to aim for more ambitious outcomes. From a European business perspective, there are several issues that we can address. Some has been already mentioned by Mr. Chang, and actually the three areas that I have selected coincide many of those with what he mentioned. First is on renewable energy. European companies are, of course, leading providers of some of the technologies in that area, in particular offshore wind, but they face certain barriers like local content requirements and other bureaucratic hurdles. The second area is cooperation on standards and best practices. We could cooperate to remove things like double testing requirements in electrical engineering sector, for example, and work to align with international standards and best practices, for example, in the area of electric buses and trucks. Cooperation in the digital area is also welcome. We favor the recent discussions on digital trade facilitation. We also understand, and I think it was mentioned already by Ms. Wu, that Taiwan has certain demands, such as facilitations to implement CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanisms. This is, of course, a very complicated regulation to implement, and we very much favor cooperation in this area to help Taiwan and facilitate that implementation. Also, you know, things like recognition of authorized economic operator, for example, that agreements in that area could also be facilitated by the EU. A final point, but I think it's a very important one to make, is that, as I said at the beginning, we also need investments in the EU, and Taiwan's foreign direct investment into the EU is quite low, so we are both, of course, putting in place diversification and de-risking strategies, especially from certain partners that we know. And we call on Taiwan to invest in the EU. There are some certain projects ongoing, and we hope they will materialize soon. So to sum up, European businesses are in favor of working together, definitely, towards closer economic ties with Taiwan, but we believe that in the current context, these are best to be sought through cooperation more at technical level. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Elena. And now it's Christy from, I have no clue where she is, but remotely.
Yes, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Christy Su, and I'm very honored to present to you a Taiwanese perspective on the issue of Taiwan-EU investment and trade relation. I'll focus more on Taiwan's outbound investment to the EU. I do have prepared a presentation, so please, next slide. So this is just to give you a flavor of Taiwan's outbound investment in the past decade, from 2014 to May this year. And China and Southeast Asia have continued to be the major destination for Taiwan's outbound investment. However, our investment going to China since 2015 has declined significantly due to various reasons. And then after 2018, China only accounts for around 30% of our total investment, and we believe that our new investment going to China will continue to decrease. And on the other hand, Southeast Asian countries have absorbed a lot of investment, particularly those relocated from China or expanded manufacturing capacity in Southeast Asia. And last year, Southeast Asia, for the first time in 2 decades, replaced China to become the largest destination for our investment. And EU and US have not been very popular destination for many years. However, in the US, the year 2020, because of the Trump's reshoring strategy and also Taiwanese company in diversified investment strategy, the year 2020 saw Taiwan investment reach $4 billion, and the first 5 months this year, the investment going to US already amounted to $5 billion. And for the EU, you have all mentioned that Taiwan has not been very keen in investing in EU, and then we do see there is a peak in 2020. The amount was $1.5 billion, and the share is about 8.5% 8.5%. And it's very noticeable that in the first 5 months, we see a number of mega M&A deals in these places. So next slide, please. Yes, my institute published a report entitled Mapping of Taiwanese Companies' Investment in EU Member States. And thanks to the EETO in Taiwan, this is the first EU-funded report focusing on Taiwan's investment in the EU. So to sum up Taiwan's investment in EU in the past 3 decades, in 1990s, Taiwan investment focusing mainly in manufacturing industry. And after the 2004 EU enlargement, the Eastern Europe became the major destination for manufacturing investment. And in the 2010s, China saw most of Taiwan's capital flow, and therefore FDI flow into the EU declined significantly. However, it was not until 2015 we saw strong growth of Taiwanese investment coming back to the EU. And this new investment have been focusing in some emerging sectors, including EV, electric vehicles, electronics and semiconductor, green textile, and smart medical industry. So next slide, please. Yes, where are Taiwanese investment located? So this map shows Taiwan's investment in different sub-regions. The blue circle represents the number of investment by Taiwan. And you can see from here that Western Europe is the place for major Taiwanese investment, including the Germany with more than 20 projects, and also Holland and also France. While the Eastern Europe have become the places mainly for investment in manufacturing. And it is very interesting because since early this year, we begin to see a number of big projects taking place in the North Europe, focusing in metal as well as EV. Next slide, please. So if we categorize this recent investment project, we will find a number of very important sectors for Taiwan EU to enhance collaboration. The first is electronic and information and communication technology, and this has been the major sector for Taiwan manufacturing investment in the EU since 2000s. And this includes greenfield project focusing in Eastern Europe and MMA project focusing in Western Europe. And this again reflects Taiwan companies' need to diversify their investment also their manufacturing capacity. And green energy, EV-related, and also e-bike manufacturing has been a rising emerging sector. This includes EV chargers, charging station, energy storage, and electric bike manufacturing. Some of the large names you may have already known include Delta, Taiwan Cement Corporation, and Giant and Meridian. And in May this year, the energy company, the Prolongan Technology, just announced a 5 billion euro investment in France. This will be the first and also the largest solid-state battery gigafactory. And other fields include electrical machinery and equipment, as well as new areas, including financial and also iron and steel. Next slide, please. And we just conducted a number of surveys for Taiwanese investing here, asking what are the major reasons for them, major concerns for them to be here. And they then familiarity with the investment environment and legislation, land and labor shortage, and also high electricity price, which was especially acute after the Russian invasion. And also there have been tax issues as well as other issues. For example, the difficulty to apply for working visa. And also, there's no social security agreement. Now, the last slide, please. So, next slide. So, as I mentioned, we conducted a survey, and these are how the Taiwanese company already investing in EU respond to us. They all respond that they are very interested in investing in EU, both in manufacturing as well as services sector post the COVID-19 pandemic, and amid their need for diversification of supply chain and also exploring new markets. And more than 70% of these companies say that they will increase or maintain the current investment level in the EU. That means they are really interested and also happy with their investment here. And they also mentioned that EU's open strategic autonomy and Green Deal and digital transition provide huge opportunity for Taiwanese companies, particularly in areas such as ICT and also semiconductor and also EV. So these are the final the policy recommendation. We encourage that both sides to investigate concerns and barriers of Taiwanese companies and address the priority issues and set a timetable to resolve the issues one by one. And the second is to work on investment promotion and facilitation, including learn from the Asian countries to organize investment promotion delegations to visit Taiwan and provide business matchmaking services. And the third will be to provide timely information on EU policy as well as legislation. And the fourth will be to review existing mechanisms to promote collaboration in strategic sectors such as tax review and also digital agreement and also trade and investment facilitation agreement. So I think I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And the last expert is Ms. Lynn Goetholz, Director of the European Institute of Asian Studies. Please.
Thank you all very much. And of course, it's always a bit of a, to be the last speaker is never the nicest thing, of course. But what I will do today is based on the previous presentations to come up with 5 main points to bear in mind or to take note of when thinking of trade relations with Taiwan. So the first one is balancing trade relations and also in view of de-risking, of course. The EU is the largest investor in Taiwan, accounting for 25% of the inward FDI. Taiwan is the EU's 12th largest trading partner in 2022, and almost 95% of trade flows concern manufactured goods. So trade relations are key. Yet, if we look at semiconductors, of course, 90% of the chips are produced in Taiwan. In view of de-risking, of course, that might be a problem for the EU in the long run. To that extent, of course, also looking at the trade deficit and the imbalances, of course, the low level of investments from Taiwan in the EU are a problem. And, of course, the potential of having semiconductor plants in the EU could also be one of the issues to look into to that extent. Of course, if we look at the investments, of course, the previous speaker has already defined a lot of different sectors where that can be done. The question is more what else can be done in the future. The second point that I would like to raise is, of course, that we need to secure supply chains and our shipping lanes. So this is more a security aspect, of course. As the pandemic and increasing tensions with the mainland have exposed serious vulnerabilities to the EU. 40% of global trade passes through the Indo-Pacific, and a lot of the shipping lanes that are actually key for the EU pass also through the Taiwan environment or the region as such. So even though Taiwan might be far away, the EU has a lot of interest at stake in the region that need to be taken into account. And if we look at investments and trade relations, of course, if tensions can have negative effects to that extent. So we need to de-risk there as well. A third aspect that has already been raised by many of the previous speakers, of course, is collaboration or the potential, therefore, in standard setting and regulatory affairs. We have seen already opportunities in terms of digital, especially AI, but also in terms of food safety, for instance, and technology overall. So I think there's a lot of room for increased cooperation there as well. Then, of course, a lot of the topics have already been mentioned, but I think there are a lot of opportunities that can still be grasped for future development in trade and investments. Energy sector has been mentioned, but also services, financial affairs. I think also in view of the social sector in both Taiwan and the EU, aging society, there is a lot that can be done. The healthcare, Taiwan has a very well developed sector there, but also the EU. So I think room for cooperation there is definitely in place. But also in terms of innovation, research and development, cybersecurity, but also education. And well, therefore also like robotics, micro and nano electronics, ICT. But given, of course, the status of Taiwan as an island, I think blue growth and ocean developments are also therefore in place. And then actually to name a fifth one, which is more also related to creating a stable business climate and environment, is of course also to look into the elections that are upcoming and what that will mean for Taiwan and EU-Taiwan relations in the future. So a bit of an overview of things that could be looked into, and of course to open up the discussion for further questions and answers. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. And now I give the floor to, of course, our standing rapporteur, but also to the colleagues for discuss the position of the experts. Julio, 2 minutes roundabout.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much to the discussants, the experts, but first of all, the two main interventions here. And I think I would like to start by having a quote of each of our two main speakers, because I think that our guest, the legislator from the Taiwanese Legislative Yuan, Cynthia Wu, is quite right when she said that a sectorial approach to a more intense EU-Taiwan bilateral cooperation would be quite interesting. And I think that several of the interventions after by the experts and quoting the interest of companies, being them European companies or Taiwanese companies, came in support of such an sectorial approach. And the domains, of course, are quite obvious because we are in a digital and green transition in the European Union, and renewable energy would be, of course, one of such sectors, but also the standardization, the field of standards and standardizations and normatives, and the close cooperation in that field. And also the whole sector of digital would be quite obvious clients for such a cooperation. Then distinguished Director Joanna Sikowska, representing DigiTrade and the European Commission, I think that also I can pick a quote from her, and that quote would be that being creative and open-minded in choosing the tools of EU-Taiwan cooperation, that would be the way to go forward. And I deeply agree with this approach, because indeed we have to be creative and open-minded when we choose our tools. And also, of course, just to underline that here in this Parliament and the International Trade Committee comes with a clear and cross-party support for enhancing EU and Taiwan relations. I think that we always bear in mind that Taiwan is a member of the WTO, and as such we are observing always in the Parliament with our recommendations the one China policy very strictly, but of course that we, as it was said here in the interventions and the experts' positions, we are clearly in favor of enhancing those relations. Of course, just to finish this intervention, we are preparing a resolution on the investment and trade relations with Taiwan. This resolution of the INTA committee will be proposed in the autumn. It is based also on these discussions here today, but it is based also on our recent visit of the International Trade Committee in Taiwan, which was a quite good visit, and I always remain with the sorry that I was not able to participate to it. And finally, that as a rapporteur for this resolution, I am now attentive to hear my colleagues, who will be also, of course, majority of them the shadow rapporteurs, and to collect the opinions. But I think that I safely can upfront say that there is in this committee a clear support of enhancing relations, economic and investment relations and trade relations with Taiwan. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks a lot, Julio. And now the shadows, and first is Immaculada from the S&D.
Muchísimas gracias, presidente. Y en primer lugar, yo también quiero empezar por felicitar tanto a las dos ponentes principales como a todos los panelistas por sus brillantes intervenciones y aportaciones. Yo creo que todos coincidimos que necesitamos y queremos y deseamos profundizar nuestras relaciones económicas y culturales con Taiwán a través de todos los canales posibles y porque todos reconocemos el enorme valor que tiene Taiwán como un socio, como un amigo y, desde luego, por la visión que desde su perspectiva de la democracia nos puede ofrecer de ese lado del continente, que creo que es muy importante. Y creo que debemos de llevar nuestras relaciones hasta el límite de lo posible, tan lejos como sea posible. Y yo creo que ahí el límite lo tenemos que marcar en términos de paz. Sin duda alguna, nuestro objetivo es garantizar y ayudar a la estabilidad y la paz en la región. Pero creo que todos hemos oído la comunicación compartida de todo el margen que tenemos para profundizar en nuestras relaciones, tanto comerciales como de inversión. Y para eso es fundamental que seamos muy pragmáticos. Yo comparto la importancia de la inteligencia siempre en cómo desarrollamos y definimos nuestras estrategias y cómo las desarrollamos, pero sin duda alguna a mí me gustaría conocer cuál es la opinión por parte de la representante de la Comisión, de la señora Sikorska, respecto a los planteamientos de profundizar más. ¿Qué pasos puede dar la Comisión y cómo podemos ayudar desde el Parlamento a que esa profundización se concrete en elementos más nítidos a la hora de profundizar nuestras relaciones? Yo creo que el informe en el que vamos a colaborar todos, vamos a ver seguro una gran comunidad, una visión muy compartida respecto a estos elementos. Yo estoy segura que, como siempre, en esta comisión somos capaces de hacer buenos acuerdos y buenas propuestas, pero a mí me interesa mucho conocer cómo ve la Comisión ese pragmatismo. Los pasos más allá de lo que es el diálogo que se concreten en reducir esas barreras a las que ahora mismo sufren empresas taiwanesas que quieren invertir en Europa y viceversa, y cómo podemos de verdad hacer posible que este socio que es Taiwán leal y fiable se concreten en acuerdos con la Unión Europea. Gracias.
Muchas gracias. Et maintenant, Marie-Pierre Vedren.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et merci à tous nos intervenants. Ça a été dit au sein de notre Parlement, nous avons toujours milité en faveur d'un accord bilatéral d'investissement entre l'Union européenne et Taïwan. Et Taïwan, c'est une île démocratique qui respecte le droit international. C'est une île qui partage nos ambitions et nos valeurs. C'est une île pour laquelle, vous l'avez dit aussi, l'Union européenne reste la plus grande source d'investissement étranger. Et au cours de des années passées, notamment l'année 2022, c'est pas moins de 30 résolutions, de déclarations qui ont été approuvées par le Parlement européen, mais aussi par les parlements nationaux, en faveur d'un rapprochement avec Taïwan. C'est une constante et nous le répétons à chaque fois, ça a été dit par les collègues, notamment dans nos missions à Taïwan. Et un accord bilatéral d'investissement serait plus que bénéfique à la fois pour Taïwan et pour l'Union européenne. Et là aussi, vous l'avez tous dit, à l'heure où les tensions s'exacerbent et où la Chine devient de plus en plus agressive et où nous travaillons tous sur une stratégie de diminution des risques et avoir des chaînes d'approvisionnement qui soient sûres et durables, nous devons absolument avancer. Alors ma question, elle est aussi plus à l'attention de la Commission européenne. Comment entendons-nous faciliter les investissements entre Taïwan et l'Union européenne sans passer par la voie d'un accord bilatéral? Comment pallier ça? Moi, il me semble, et je l'ai dit, l'accord bilatéral est absolument important. Donc, quelle autre solution pourrait être imaginée par la Commission européenne? Et ça, étant donné qu'aussi les investissements étrangers directs taïwanais en Europe reste inférieur. Vous avez évoqué les différents secteurs, que ce soit sur le renouvelable, que ce soit sur les voitures électriques, les technologies. C'est des secteurs absolument importants. Mais quels autres axes vous voyez-vous de coopération à l'heure où, justement, nous parlons des technologies vertes et de l'économie numérique? Comment les choses peuvent être allées de l'avant? Et puis, on revient d'une mission aussi en Indonésie. Et je pense que ce partenariat Union européenne-Taïwan, il joue un rôle plus global aussi dans la région. Comment aussi cette relation renforcée, selon les différents intervenants, peut jouer un rôle de stabilisation dans l'ensemble de la zone. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup. Reinhard Bütikofer, around about 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank our two keynote speakers and all the experts. They have given impressive evidence to the relevancy of this trade and investment partnership and given us good facts with which we can argue in favor of enhancing it. As everybody knows, this Parliament is in favor of having a bilateral investment agreement. Everybody knows, too, that we won't have it this year and probably not next year. But we should not slam the door shut because we have to, and I agree with both our keynote speakers when they set out an approach of pragmatic, step-by-step approaches to move forward. But we have to keep the goal in mind. And let me say that very clearly. Neither should EU-Taiwan relations be hostage to EU-PRC relations, nor should we address these relations in order to poke China in the eye. We want to do that. We want to improve the relations on the basis of the merit of Taiwan and our relationship with Taiwan as a partner. However, we cannot completely ignore the political context. And I agree with the representative from Business Europe when she says we should do our best to keep the status quo stable and to stabilize security. Because, for instance, the shipping lanes are so important for us too. But the reality is that from Beijing, there are strategies being pursued to suffocate or subjugate Taiwan. And if we want to keep stability, we have to strengthen our relationship with Taiwan in order to help stabilizing what Beijing undercuts. So we cannot shy away from the reality. I believe that indeed there are many good reasons for a wealth of initiatives. The trade irritants that have been mentioned or technical barriers, but looking at the wind industry, for instance, European business has already been missing opportunities because we have not been able to come up with a more favorable environment for that kind of investment. So there is something to be done. On the other hand, we're also not happy with the lack of Taiwanese investment in Europe. I believe that we can move forward in many different ways, but we should really not shy back from, as one of the experts said, creating more visible and high-profile contacts and having government-to-government structured approaches enhanced. One of the ideas that Representative Cynthia Wu mentioned was sectoral or supply chain agreements. You all know that we have produced a study that looks into this idea, and I think it's very promising, particularly for the energy sector, for the health sector, also for the IT sectors. So I hope that this hearing here would help us mobilizing all the energies that we need to indeed deepen the relationship both with regard to trade and investment without blinders that keep us from doing the right thing. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Reinhard. Helmut.
Thank you, Chair, and I also want to thank the honorable speakers, in particular the introductory main speakers. And I want also to remind us that the EU summit just adopted its redefined China policy and China strategy. And it reiterated the common position of one China policy. As you all know by that, and I think we should be frank on that, and I know that also the political different structures and stakeholders at Taiwan are sharing, I think, this approach. Coming to terms with the PRC is defining the corridor for interactivity between Europe and Taiwan. And strong economic relations between companies operating in Taiwan and mainland China should also be a factor which we have to take into consideration when we are speaking about the relationship between EU and Taiwan, in particular in the economics area. This includes investments, and I was also impressed by the figures that the ASEAN countries just today are more the main, how to say, addresser of direct investments from Taiwan than the mainland China. The entire world has already started a charm offensive towards Taiwan to win the globally leading semiconductor companies as a partner for starting the state-of-the-art production also in Japan, United States, and the EU. And just recently, there was also the talks about direct investments of the TSMC corporation in India, which are just have stopped, and the company is not anymore going to India in the producing. So we should embrace, therefore, the opportunities to get closer in our economic, academic, and cultural cooperation. What are the factors for doing so? So how far, and that would be a question maybe to either to the main speakers or also to the panelists, which role plays also for Taiwanese firms in these sectors, the state aid and the subsidies for having the chance to continue its development. Taiwan as an island could be also very much exposed to the consequences of the climate catastrophe. So how far we are using this commercial cooperation for dealing in the renewable energy sector and to cooperate in the way to take it together, the climate change. Finally, however, we should not spoil the opportunity of closer relations by demanding steps that no leader in Beijing would be able to go. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And now the other members, Kathleen van Bremt, for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks a lot to the speakers. And I think just the mere fact that we had a mission to Taiwan, which was indeed, as mentioned, an excellent visit, but also the fact that we go in depth today on our relations trade, but also security and geopolitical relations is already an advancement compared to a couple of years ago where we sort of shied away from these discussions, and I think that's extremely important. Of course, the world has changed dramatically since then. As mentioned by many colleagues, sometimes very diplomatic, as our rapporteur, sometimes a little bit more explicit, like with Reinhard Bütikofer. I would also like to express a little bit my concern. The European Commission, and we agree on that, after the pandemic and after the geopolitical changes and the war, we all said we need a more offensive trade policy again. When we talk about partners having the same values like Taiwan, or we talk about partners having close economic cooperation like Taiwan, we would immediately go into a process of having an agreement, a bilateral investment agreement, an FTA, or why not a supply chain agreement, but connected can I just take enough half a minute more, Chair, because otherwise I cannot say anything, just half a minute. I think that is key, and it annoys me that when it comes to Taiwan, then the Commission starts having all this jumble of words to say, no, we're not going that direction. We do all these technical agreements, but we do not go in that direction. Politically and economically, we have to work on an agreement. And I want to really stress that. I have two questions, because there were a lot of issues also about trade irritants. And when we were in Taiwan, we discussed also with the business community on these trade irritants. And a good agreement could solve these trade irritants. It's been 6 months now. Have we seen any advancement when it comes to these trade irritants, especially when it comes to renewable energy and offshore energy? A lot of intervenants spoke about health, and I understand that health has become a very crucial and important issue after the pandemic, and it is important to collaborate. But is it possible to go a little bit more in depth? Which part of health policies could be part of a closer relation with Taiwan? Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And from my side, I want to come back to the question on the investment in Europe. I didn't really understood why there is so low investment of Taiwan in Europe, specifically in the field of semiconductor. You mentioned 65% of global semiconductor supply is done by Taiwan, and everybody is knowing that we want to increase semiconductor production in Europe. We have the CHIPS Act now coming in force. So what is the reason why Taiwan is not investing in this, specifically in this sector inside the European Union? And now I give back the floor to the experts, perhaps in the opposite order, so that Lynn has also the chance to start and be not always the last one. Lynn, please.
Well, there's a lot of questions. I think there's more for the other experts, but I think the question on why investments are so low, I think for a long time also the EU may have not been as much on the radar to a certain extent. I mean, Taiwan has also, in terms of semiconductors, mainly invested in its own plants in everything in Taiwan itself. It's only been a recent move to actually move abroad. So that is one reason, but of course, I think there's more experts that can actually expand on that part. I think in the health sector, maybe for now, for Europe, this is now a new topic. But I think, especially for Taiwan and Asia, this has been a topic for a very long time. Of course, they've already had SARS, MERS, and a few others. So they have already invested in these aspects, 10, 15 years ago. Also in terms of the health sector, maybe not necessarily in terms of policies only, but also in terms of equipment, in terms of technology, Taiwan is already rather advanced there. There might be other parts except for policies only to look at Taiwan and in terms of cooperation there. I think most of the other questions were also related more to or directed at the Commission, so I'll actually keep it to that. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Christy.
Yes, I will be very happy to. Sorry, I will be very happy to respond to the question. We have interviewed, I think, more than 24 Taiwanese companies. And for semiconductor companies, the reason is always they need to make investment in a cluster. That means either TSMC or UMC have to be there, followed by their key suppliers. And so far, TSMC, as far as I know, is negotiating the subsidy program with the German government. If they can successfully get subsidy, and then they can encourage a lot of suppliers with them. However, you will also have to consider to provide incentive to this key suppliers. For example, tax break and also other issues. So this is one thing that please remember that Taiwanese company always invest in cluster. It's never a single company going there. And the second issue is we've been interviewing a number of companies that already have their operations in Czech Republic, for example. Last year, we interviewed Foxconn as well as Wistron. These two companies have been very successful in Czech Republic. They produce their products there and then sell the products to all over the European market. However, they have requested the government to provide them with more land and also more human resources, but that was not possible at this juncture. And for example, the Foxconn as well as Wistron, they always hope to invest in a well-developed industrial zone, but that is not the case or the practice in many countries. So I think that there will be a discussion needed to facilitate that kind of development, that kind of industrial zone, so that they can accommodate Taiwanese company, especially for a company in the same supply chain to come together in the same industrial zone, so they can access to each other within 1 hour, half an hour's drive. So that would be my quick answer. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Christy. And Elena, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I don't think that there were specific questions directed at me, but my comment would be that I certainly agree and coincide, and this is also the view of my members, is that we should address the situation in a pragmatic way. And I agree very much with what has been said, that we should go as far as possible in deepening our economic relations with Taiwan. But there are certain limits, as we know, and I would say that keeping the status quo again, I think it's is very much one of the limits, or also keeping peace in the region, as I think Inmaculada Garcia Piñero said it. And the last thing is also that I agree very much that we need investments in Europe, and there has been some attempts, there are some projects ongoing, but we hope that those will materialize in the near future, because we also need investments, and Taiwan has announced certain investments, for example, in the US, but in Europe, still we are waiting for that to become true. Thank you.
Indeed, we are waiting. Good, and then we have Henry Chang from Taiwan.
Sorry, no, I'm not. I fully agree with the chairman's comment and observation that based on whether it's the multiple languages, geography, and cultures, there's a great deal of parallel between Europe and Taiwan, and that there should be more investment. The reason why it's not, I'm sure there are many folds, some are historic, some are defensive reasons, but I think on a fundamental level, it's more familiarity. So I think efforts such as the Innovation Week, efforts such as all of the country representative and trade offices here, try to connect all the businesses with each other. And finally, as I said earlier, a more structured government-to-government approach would go a long way in terms of sending a signal to both investors as well as the governments on both sides. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Tsutia, you want to come in?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. May I just be blunt to say that currently as it stands, that there is simply a bilateral trade consultation between Taiwan and the EU. That is basically a B2B, applies to B2B arrangements. But if you look at the foreign direct investment slide that I had provided earlier, the top two foreign direct investment outbound from Taiwan being the US and Singapore, which constitute 45% of our foreign direct investment. Those two have already entered formal G2G arrangements with Taiwan. And as I specified, also illustrated in one of my last slides in my presentation, there are now over 32 agreements from countries that have entered various formal G2G arrangements. So I would urge Parliament and the Commission to look into those for consideration, because it is true that it is a delicate wire walking act to make sure that one respects the one China policy, but at the same time try to secure what is in one's strategic autonomy or strategic national interests. And for the average Taiwanese person, many people I talk to are shocked by the fact that the EU is the largest foreign direct investor in Taiwan. Most people, even journalists in Taiwan, have never heard of such a thing. My husband is Belgian, and I've lived in Europe. I worked in the city in London in banking. So, I understand the dynamics between Taiwan and Europe much more than the average person. Given the struggle between the battle of supremacy between US and China, and that fact that Taiwan has historically been a colony of Japan, those three places play into people's minds a lot more than the EU. So I would urge that if EU does want to build more connectivity with Taiwan, the only way is to look and explore the 32 arrangements that have been illustrated and to take forth from that point. And in addition, of course, a lot of the areas that have been mentioned today as well through sectorial but government-to-government arrangements. And because I do not believe that what I'm hearing from DigiTrade about creative and open-mindedness means targeted. Targeted is weak. Targeted will not speak to the businesses in Taiwan, and it needs to be much stronger in terms of a G2G agreement in some form. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Joanna.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for all the questions. And most of them are very difficult. I think there are no easy problems that we are discussing here today, and they are all very legitimate. And we have to handle those questions. We have to handle them in the Commission, as member states, and in the European Parliament. I think we have to acknowledge that this is a very complex exercise we are in, and what guides our reflection is, I think, and that's what we converge, where we agree, is that we are all focused on enhancing our relations with Taiwan. But where we might differ is what it takes, what are we talking about in terms of content, and I repeat the word, what is the best mechanism? And debates like this actually very much help us to think where we should go and how we should go further. But I would also hope that what we present and how we justify it is also something that can be taken into consideration. I would just make one formal comment. There is also a colleague from the EIS, so maybe when I deal with questions on trade and investment, Nicoletta could elaborate on some more global items. So I think the several observations that you made and comments that you formulated, they somehow all evolve around the question of bilateral agreement. Is it essential, yes or not? And I think before answering this question, we have to understand why at all we are talking about bilateral agreement. So what is the purpose? What is the objective? And in what direction would this agreement make us go? Because I heard one of the speakers saying that we need to have elevated G2G relations in order to send a signal that Europe is a safe place to invest. I would say Europe is a very safe place to invest without any agreement. I think we all have to recognize this. That is not put into question. We are a market economy, we have independent business, we have the highest levels of investment protection, and this is not about a formal agreement that would get further enhanced. And by the way, this is also the situation in Taiwan. I think we are exactly mirroring each other's situations when it comes to the overall business and investment environment, and that has to be recognized. And by the way, also some of you made references to how the trade flows and investments changed in the US, and that's true, because I think over the last year, there is almost 15% increase of trade between Taiwan and the US, and more than 100% increase of investments. But this is not because of the treaty that has been signed or that would have been signed, because there was none. Indeed, there is a 21st century first agreement that has been negotiated, but this is a very different type of agreement, and this is not about making investments come to the US. The reasons are different. So I think we have to put facts straight before we think what is the best way forward. And now to some specific questions that you mentioned. So what is it that we want to do? How we want to go about it, and where we source the information from. That was said by some preceding speakers. We source it from discussions with the industry, Taiwanese industry and European industry. It's not us sitting in the office that would come with the right solution. We have a very intensive and actually intensifying dialogue with the business community here in Europe, but also in Taiwan. And these two events that were mentioned, this is not just a propaganda event. I think we have to really get it clear. These were business encounters that lasted for days, and that resulted in forging new business ties in the sectors that I mentioned. This is a very concrete deliverable, and this is something that makes us think that indeed maybe there are barriers, maybe there are opportunities, and we have to build on it. The second point is we heard today, and I heard it maybe for the first time, that there is something to do when it comes to health. Very interesting idea. We didn't look into that, and I think we would be keen to dig more and to understand what exactly there is to be done with regards to health, exchange of data. Why not? I think we have to approach it with interest, and we'll do it. And the third element is, apart from looking into how we enhance our cooperation, what are the prospective areas of working together, there are still trade irritants. And this is what we have to address in the first place. So I think there was a question how we are tackling the problem of offshore wind and SPS, and that if we had a treaty, that would allow to solve these problems. I would say this is not a matter of treaty that solves the problem of SPS regionalization or offshore wind. This is a matter of having a discussion like we had 2 months ago and last month. How do we go about specific local content requirements in tenders procedures, and what we do in order for these requirements not to reappear in new tender auctions that will be launched in the future. And I think these are very concrete cases where the work has to be done, has not yet been done, but this is not because of the bilateral investment treaty that we're going to solve those problems. So I think this is very, very clear. Now, there were 2 more points that were mentioned. One was the question of supply chains cooperation, so sectorial cooperation. Indeed, we had a discussion about supply chains, potential supply chains agreement. We had it in March. I think we very seriously approached the study that has been presented and the areas that had been looked into the study. And the conclusion from the discussion was that a number of recommendations that have been made in this specific study has been already taken into account by the dialogues that we have put in place and by the cooperation that we have on business platforms. This was one of the conclusions of the meetings, which doesn't mean we are not going to look further, and we will, but this is simply a comment on the discussion that has already taken place on a specific blueprint for the supply chains cooperation, which, when it comes to semiconductors, we have and actually are developing together with DG Connect along several lines of that are relevant for the supply chains cooperation for semiconductors. And the last point, which I think is equally important, is a matter of context. And I indeed would like to stress that this discussion is happening in a specific geopolitical context. We have to factor it in while discussing what is the best way forward in order, as several of you said, not to upset an equilibrium, which is very fragile. And this is not what prevents us from enhancing our relations with Taiwan, not at all. This is not what makes us shy away. We are minded to go further, but this is something we have to factor in when we think what would be the best solution. So I think these were the couple of comments. Yes, maybe one more point that was mentioned by Cynthia towards the very end about formal G&G arrangements. I would say that we actually do have formal G2G arrangements. We don't talk about agreement. I use the word arrangement. And I think a discussion at the ministerial level is very much G2G arrangement. So I think we have these arrangements. They are basis for ongoing and future cooperation. And on top of this, of course, there is business-to-business community exchange, which is, as I said, extremely important source of inspiration for us how to go ahead with trade and investment relations with Taiwan. So I will stop here. And again, on more global points, there is my colleague from the EIS.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jonna. And Ms. Nicoletta Pusterla, Deputy Head of Division Asia Pacific, will give now a perspective from the EAS for 5 minutes.
Many thanks, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. Indeed, just let me reiterate our thanks for organizing this debate, as well as other debates on Taiwan. These are very useful and help and feed into discussions we have. The European Parliament engagement on Taiwan has been very consistent and continued in the past years, and let me confirm that Taiwan remains high on the EU agenda. Some of the previous interventions referred to the recent EU Council conclusions, when we had a paragraph referring also to Taiwan in the part of the text on China. And let me highlight how this the perspective that has been highlighted by several speakers today, the fact that we have concerns and we have an interest in maintaining the status quo and the stability in the region, and our engagement with Taiwan goes hand in hand with this strategic objective. And of course, any interaction happens within the remit of the EU's one China policy, but this means, as many other speakers mentioned, proceeding with creativity and an open mind, and identifying where EU interests are, and where indeed on sectoral and not only on trade and economic relations, but also on cultural relations, in other areas where we see that we can continue our dialogue and deepen our relations. We are engaged to proceed. Let me refer also to the fact that we have seen definitely an increased interest, and there is a lot of work ongoing, as Director Szychowska mentioned, with different parts of the Commission. I think every colleague who is working with us is aware and is contributing to this work. What we always say and suggest as our position is that our work should continue in the spirit of persistence, but without provocation. So this does not mean that we should stop, but of course we should take into consideration the current situation and identify, ask ourselves what our main goals. These are also messages that we pass consistently, that EU leaders have passed consistently in meetings with Chinese leaders, highlighting our concerns for increased tensions across the Taiwan Strait. Let me just finish by flagging how relations with Taiwan remains excellent, and indeed I think it's very relevant to mention that there are meetings happening in the absence of formal agreements, but meetings are happening. There are exchanges, in-depth exchanges, and they are meaningful. So I will leave it at that. Many thanks.
Thanks a lot. And now we have the wonderful opportunity for Julio to conclude the discussion.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you, dear colleagues, dear guests, Commission, External Action Service, all the participants of this hearing. I think we had a very well spent time in this 1.5 hours. I think we have been really also thorough in our thoughts, but also outspoken and direct in our messages. So, Chairman, today I am gathering quotes. I don't know how it's happened, but now I have again 2 quotes. One of my quote comes from the lawmaker from Taiwan, Cynthia Wu. She said, delicate wire walk, referring to our EU-Taiwan relations, and I couldn't agree more. And the second quote, of course, comes from DigiTrade, from the Commission, from Joanna Sichowska. She said this same EU-Taiwan relations is a very complex exercise, and also I couldn't agree more. So maybe if I have a few seconds, I would try to be also in an exercise of sincerity in front of you, dear colleagues, because we will have to do in the autumn a good report, and a report that should cover our opinions. So I would like to try to define my role as a rapporteur of INTA in the EU-Taiwan relations. And of course, this is a delicate wire walk, and it is a very complex exercise. My role as a rapporteur, and I see it as discussing, debating, gathering opinions, gathering political positions of the groups and so on, until we succeed to find the common denominator of our positions. Of course, it would not be the lowest common denominator, but it would be, if such thing exists, the highest possible common denominator of our positions. And that would be, it seems to me, the principle that tomorrow we have to have more than we have today. Each day tomorrow, in the field of EU-Taiwan relations, we want, and the Parliament agrees, I think, at least on this, that we need more than we have today. We need to sustain this, to maintain this upwards going trend. So I would like to finish by having 2 messages. I think first I turn to our Taiwanese guests, and I think my message would be based on the interventions here and the positions of the experts. Please let's cooperate in tackling technical barriers, tackling trade irritants signaled by the European companies. Clearly, as you could hear today, the European Commission and DigiTrade would be a partner in common efforts of tackling those irritants. And clearly, you have the political support here in International Trade Committee. And then to finish with a sort of, message or address to the European Commission, to DigiTrade, I think that you should make all efforts to make the most possible from the upgraded economic and trade dialogue. Of course, we are seeing here clear security implications for our dialogue, and we have to factor in our new economic security initiatives, the European Union's new economic security initiatives. And then in this spirit of having tomorrow more than today, please, for example, tackle these operational problems that everybody has been speaking about. For example, you mentioned this investment working group, and I really see potential in such an investment working group, which should work more, should deliver more, and should have more concrete results. So I'm looking forward after the summer break to our work together to have a new report in which we do not necessarily repeat the sentences from our reports earlier, but we are creative enough and we incorporate what we discussed today. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Julio. And I really can underline your statement that it was a really fruitful hearing here with a lot of new information. Please, you want to come in?
Mr. Chairman, could I also just have a quick few concluding remarks? I agree with Vice Chair Winkler about Europe needing more tomorrow than today. But I would also think one could consider that Europe could consider why the 32 countries who have signed agreements with Taiwan, despite our delicate position in the international community, why have they felt the need to sign these formal agreements with Taiwan? And also, perhaps another example to take would be from Singapore. They were able to host Xi Jinping and former President Ma Ying-jeou's conference in Singapore, and they also held Trump and North Korea Kim Jong-un's meeting, and as well as the fact that they are one of Taiwan's big trade partners and have signed agreements with us. And I just hope that Europe would have more confidence in entering an agreement with Taiwan that's respectful of China's concern as well. And because currently, as it stands, just to answer the other keynote speaker's comments, a bilateral trade consultation currently is a dialogue between the Ministry of Economics and the EU. That is not the kind of arrangement that we are discussing today. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. So once again, thanks a lot to everybody joining the hearing here, to the experts and to the colleagues asking the question and comments. And Julio, you have the task now to prepare the resolution after the summer breaks. Thanks a lot to everybody, and we will see each other here in the committee at the coordinators at 2:30, and then the committee at 3:30. Thanks a lot.